Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria. So I've been thinking a little bit about competition and tournaments in HEMA and where I feel I fit in that aspect of things. I've been doing HEMA for nearly 20 years now, since around 1997, so actually just over 20 years. And in the early days, I was a big exponent, I still am, of tournaments and competition. I used to compete in a lot of stuff wherever I could. It has to be said, HEMA was smaller then. Everything, the events, there were generally speaking less participants. The tournaments, generally speaking, had less fighters in them. But anyway, I was a big exponent and very big promoter of the idea of competing for a number of reasons. One, I thought it was important to drive HEMA kind of interpretation and where we were, our levels of effectiveness, fitness, and also our understanding of how these systems actually work against unwilling opponents. So I was a big fan of it from that perspective. I was also a big fan of it from the perspective of kind of promoting what we do as a martial art, as a thing that is combative and sporting, if you like. As something that's, it's a physical thing. It's not a cerebral. I mean, it's got a cerebral aspect to it in terms of research and interpretation and stuff. But fundamentally, it's about fighting, isn't it? So so as a big, exponent from that point of view. And also promoting, and that's a very important thing, promoting what we do so that it would appeal to people coming in from other martial arts or sport fencing or whatever, who would see, oh, there's this other thing that we could enter and train for and get good at and compete at. And a number of other aspects. One of the other most important, there are a number of things I could go into, but I won't get into a huge amount of depth. But one of the other aspects why I think that competition can be important. It's not necessarily vital for everyone, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the reasons why I think it can be important is fundamentally when we're understanding a combative thing, a martial art, for the most part, certainly when it comes to things like sword fighting, it's very unlikely you're ever really going to have to do this for real. And it has to be said, historically, a lot of the people who learnt it never did it for real as well. Definitely if we're looking at the 18th and 19th century, but even if we go further back than that, Fiore famously points out that he had to defend his life 5 times. That was a lot, for a medieval person. Most medieval Renaissance people who learnt how to use a sword never actually had to use a sword. Obviously, some people were soldiers and went to war, but they made up the minority of society. People like Saviolo actually served as soldiers. Paulus Cal served as a soldier. But the majority of people who wrote books, who were fencing instructors, never actually necessarily in a sort of life or death situation had to use what they were teaching or what they had learnt. And obviously that's true of most of their students as well. So the point is that I think that competition gives you a way of using what you've learnt and testing it. Can I do this under pressure? Now, a lot's made of this, and so I talk about adrenaline and being fearful and all this kind of stuff. And it has to be said that fighting in a tournament, in a competition, is absolutely different to fighting for your life. And I've spoken about this before, but equally, fighting for your life isn't always the same. There's different scenarios. Fighting on a battlefield is very different from being suddenly attacked in the street, where there's no expectation beforehand, where you don't, you're not kind of mentally prepared for it. And that can be plus and minus. Sometimes if you know something's coming, like if you know you have to fight a duel the next day, it could be for many people that fear or that adrenaline or whatever would work against them. And for other people, they could work themselves up to it and they could perform better. And this is the same as tournaments. And that's one of the other reasons why I think competing is really good for lots of people, because fundamentally, it gives you a different way of testing how you perform. So some people, I could name people, but I don't think that'd be fair to them. But some people from my club, some people from other clubs, some instructors I know. There are some people I know who I have fenced with or I fence with regularly, who I know perform better in competition than they do in club sparring. But I know other people who perform much better in club sparring, club kind of, casual, kind of relaxed sparring, fencing, than they do in competition. So in short, I wouldn't necessarily say that fighting in tournaments or competitions is necessarily something that's closer to real life fighting, or that that everybody needs to do it in order to be a real humorist or be a real, martial artist. It's just another way of pressure testing, I suppose, yourself and what you've learned, and it's a different environment. And I have to say, some people, not many, but some people seem to be completely unaffected by having to fight in front of other people or in a competitive situation. From a personal point of view, one of the things that and I don't hugely enjoy competing, although I forced myself to do it for many years, I felt less of my, what's the word? Not pride. I felt like I had a responsibility to, but that's maybe something I'll talk about in a different video, but I'm touching on that in this video. But I do think that some people gain something from fighting in a competitive situation, and specifically the thing that I found I gained the most from was having to fight against someone who I'd never fought before. And for me, that's a very, very interesting thing, because one of the problems in club sparring, in fencing, is that you tend to fight the same people week on, week out, okay, over and over and over again. And you basically know more or less what each of you do. And it can, I won't say it gets boring, I actually find it kind of comfortable in a weird way. And there's still that kind of game of chess there. You're still trying to basically neutralize what the other person does, and you're trying to outdo them up, essentially play their game and beat them at their game, and play to their weaknesses and your strengths. But when you come up against someone in tournament pools or in whatever stage of a tournament, you maybe don't know anything about them, and I find that fascinating. I find that moment of contact with the opponent in this case, or whatever, I find that really, really interesting, and that's for me a very interesting part of training martial arts, is how do you train and prepare for that moment of contact and learn from it as quickly as possible from those first few seconds of engagement, so that you can try and gain some kind of advantage. Now, I would say that of people in my club who've done fairly well in competition over the years, the ones who do the best, generally speaking, in competition as opposed to club sparring, are the people who are most able to adapt quickly, okay? And a lot of success in combat, as I have experienced it, so simulated sport, contact sports essentially, comes down to how quickly you can work out the opponent and, as I said before, play to your strengths and their weaknesses. And a lot of people I know who are very good fencers in general are not great at doing that, and therefore don't perform particularly well in tournaments. But coming around to the final point that I wanted to make is that I'm kind of going through, and this is a personal thing, and this may not interest most of the viewers of this, but maybe some of you can relate to it. Maybe it will give you an insight into how someone in my position, whatever that is, kind of feels about tournaments and competitions. So first of all, I run one of the biggest HEMA tournaments in the UK annually at Fight Camp. We have 6 tournaments. I enjoy running them, and they're very interesting to run, and we have some really good fighters in those. But I'm additionally also involved in, I have been in the past involved in running tournaments elsewhere, such as Dijon and Vienna as well. I've been involved with judging there. But I'm also involved in essentially preparing some of the people from my club to compete in things. So for example, in 2017, Pedro, who's one of my main free scholars, one of my main students in my club in London, he fought through a series of tournaments in the so-called Wessex League and eventually won the Sabre gold. And Amir as well is quite well known. He fights in all tournaments all over the place. So does Pedro, in fairness. But there are other people from the club. So Pedro and Amir are fairly well known on the tournament scene. They're two of the best fighters in my club, but there are others, and not all of the others fight in tournaments. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to point out, was that just because someone's known for fighting in tournaments, and quite rightly so, they build a reputation and a name for themselves, it doesn't mean that they're the only good ones. There are other people regularly fencing in my fencing clubs who I fence with, and I see them fencing Pedro, and I see them fencing Amir and the other good people around, and some of them are really good, okay? But just because they don't go to and compete in tournaments and competitions doesn't mean that they are less good fencers. It just means that they don't do that. Do they miss out? Maybe, yeah, maybe they miss out on a certain aspect of experience. Maybe they would be even better if they competed a bit more. They'd certainly be better at competing, because let's not forget that competing is a skill in itself. And if you take someone like Amir from my club, he's extremely experienced at competing. He's been British stick fighting champion and all this kind of stuff. So he's got a huge amount of competition experience outside of HEMA, and he brings that experience with him. You know, how to either work himself up or keep himself calm, or whatever he needs to do to make himself perform at the best for competitions. And preparing yourself for competition is a skill in itself. Aside of the technical, you know, what you actually do with your sword, that is a skill in itself. It's, you know, self-control, I suppose, psychological control of yourself. And someone like Pedro, for example, took probably a couple of years to get used to that. And much like me, I certainly suffered when I started competing, and for many years actually, even after I've been teaching in HEMA and competing in HEMA for many years, I still got performance anxiety and found it a very stressful process. And lots of people don't, and lots of people are better. I always felt that I, generally speaking, in most circumstances, don't fence quite as well in a competitive environment as I do in, you know, sparring in my club environment. But I would say that's the case with most people. But a few people I actually see fence better in a competition environment, because they're somehow able to bring a little bit more mojo to that situation. So I'm in a situation now where I'm getting pretty old in martial arts terms. So I'm 41, and I started doing HEMA, you know, 21 years ago. And yeah, I'd done sport fencing and a little bit of kendo and stuff before that in my teenage years, but essentially I started HEMA when I was at university. And yeah, and so for me, I didn't enter any competitions in 2017, but I haven't officially retired. But equally, I was never a big enterer of tournaments. Like I wasn't fighting lots and lots of tournaments per year. I'd usually fight about 3 or 4 competitions a year, and that was it. So where am I now? And that's the personal bit, which I'm afraid, I apologise, it's probably not very interesting to most of you. I'm just kind of vocalising my thoughts and where I am now. I feel like I didn't enter anything last year. The year before, I won the Sabre Invitational at Long Point, fought against some really interesting fighters, including Christopher Stanson and Jake Norwood and various other people. You know, I've had the honour to fight against some really good fighters, both Sabre and Rapier, and going back further with longsword, but that's further ago for me now. And so I kind of know where I am, but I don't feel the drive. I don't feel the need to compete like I used to. I think for me it used to be about trying to prove my whatever, I hate you saying this, but reputation. I had proving the fact that, you know, I'm a HEMA instructor, and kind of proving the fact that I have the right to be a HEMA instructor, because I will actually step up and compete and do okay, and sometimes win something, sometimes not. But I don't necessarily feel that need anymore, because I feel like I've done that. And HEMA's young, and the problem is that in HEMA there's still this idea that, you know, oh, if you want to keep your reputation in HEMA, you have to keep competing. But realistically, people can't do that. If you've already done that for 10 years and you're getting kind of middle-aged and old, you can still enter stuff, of course, but there will come a point at which you're just too old or can't be bothered to compete, but you're still useful as an instructor and a coach, and you're still probably a pretty decent fencer. And you know, I would say that within my club, I still fence every week pretty much, sometimes twice a week, with Pedro and Amir when he's around, and various other people in the club who are really good fencers. So I still kind of know where I am. I know where my training, where sometimes I'm kind of out of practice and there are things I need to work on, and I'm still trying to improve. I'm still trying to keep my game up. But is it worth me competing? I don't know. And one of the main drives for me thinking about competing these days is actually as a kind of to show kind of solidarity with my club members who are competing, and to help, you know, coach them at these events and this kind of stuff. But it's really difficult when you don't have the drive, when you don't feel the need to compete anymore. I don't feel like I have anything to prove, and in all honesty, I kind of feel like that is an important driving force when you are a competitive martial artist. You kind of almost need that hunger. You need that thing saying, I need to show that I can do this. And I don't think I really need that anymore. I'm quite happy on myself. So I don't know. I feel like I should compete, but equally I don't feel like I need to compete. So will I enter some competitions in 2018? I'm thinking about it. I was supposed to fight in one not long ago actually, but unfortunately because of the snow and the weather and my car needing a repair, I couldn't get there. But anyway, we'll see. Though I have to admit, you know, even for me at this stage in my life, as it were, it is still attractive to me, the idea of going and getting to fence with lots of different people, but I don't feel like I need the competition environment to do that. There are other, you know, the sparring area at Fight Camp or wherever else. I think that's another great opportunity, and I think maybe we shouldn't be underplaying the fact that what's it all about at the end of the day. One of the things is about fighting unfamiliar opponents in a friendly environment, of course, and you can do that. You don't need to have a tournament, you don't need to have a competition to do that, and I think we shouldn't neglect that form of event, of meetup, of interaction. We shouldn't always need to stick points on it and award medals. We can just have these kind of meetups where people from different clubs come together and fence a lot and all have a good time without having to quantify and qualify everything. But that's not to say that at all that we shouldn't do that, we shouldn't quantify and qualify sometimes, but just that it's not the only form of interaction between different fencers from different clubs. So my rambling thoughts about competition, HEMA, everything else. Please feel free to share your views on tournaments and sportification and you know, the pluses and the minuses and your personal experiences underneath this video. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I probably should talk about that side of things more. Maybe I'll do some tournament reports, or maybe have a look at preparing some of my students to fight in competitions or coaching or something like that. I think it'd be an interesting extra angle to look at on the channel. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers! Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon, and you can follow us on Facebook.